But yeah, I think that was the goal, was to increase jungling path diversity. And they did that early game, and they didn't want them carrying every high elo solo queue game, which was kind of close to what was happening last year.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
This is Zento from Esports Heaven, and I have here with me Jatt.
Hey.
Now, so there's been a lot of changes this season, but before we get into that, actually, I want to talk about your new podcast.
Sure.
So, for those that don't know, why don't you explain a little bit about it and kind of the initial idea of what got you to do that?
Yeah, so I'm going to be doing a new podcast this year. It's called JLXP, which is short for the Josh Leisman Experience. But I'm hoping long-term to model it a little bit like the Bill Simmons podcast, where you can have a lot of different guests on. You can do fairly long episodes or short or medium length episodes to talk about pretty much whatever is relevant. And that's what I'm hoping to be able to do throughout the split. So the first 5 episodes were just preview episodes of the 10 LCS teams, 2 teams per episode. And I think I had 6 or 7 unique guests on. And throughout the year, while it'll probably be fairly LCS dominant, I'm not against calling Bryce from the LCK or some other type of international caster to have more international conversations, or maybe even talk a little bit about gameplay. Still feeling it out, but it's meant to be a fairly open podcast that can grow with time.
That's cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
So I wanted to kind of dive into the actual gameplay that we're seeing right now, because we're seeing picks like Aphelios a little bit, or Senna too. And I wanted to get your thoughts on just balancing any champion, basically. So everyone's saying that Aphelios is incredibly hard to balance. Then we've already had, Ryze balancing issues, Azir balancing issues. So what are your thoughts on champions kind of being impossible to balance, so to speak?
This is relevant because I was on the balance team for 8 months last year. I think it is a very difficult thing to try and balance the game. And what's interesting is there's actually, I don't know exactly the name for it, but it's kind of a balance framework where the League of Legends team has defined the 4 tiers of play that they're balancing around. They're balancing around Pro, Elite, which is basically like Master and above, then relatively high elo, which is basically like Plat Plus, and then basically everyone else. And the rules there are, you don't want a champion to be overpowered in any of those roles, but they need to be at least viable somewhere. So certain times when you have champions like Ryze, their kits are so skewed towards either favoring people who are very, very good or just working very, very well in the way the game is played at Pro. But then you run into a secondary problem where if they're overpowered there and completely unplayable elsewhere, you're kind of trapped, which is why you've ended up seeing tons and tons of iteration work on champions like Akali, on Ryze, on Aatrox. So it's definitely something that the team is very aware of, and that's actually why you see all these changes. So like when people say that Akali or Aatrox have been nerfed 12 times, they've also been buffed like 9, right? Because every time they're nerfed for Pro, they're getting buffed for some other bracket to try and make them more viable for whatever tier of play they're going for at the moment. And I think you're going to see more and more communication down the road about being more explicit about where they're balancing. Again, I can't completely speak for the team. I haven't been on that team since I think patch 9.14, but that's some of the stuff we were dealing with last year.
So now we have dragons and the whole system with dragons and the dragon soul and whatnot. And we've seen a couple games now from professional play, and it feels as though the game is kind of getting faster and faster and faster.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on just the speed of the game in aspects of Pro versus aspects of just, solo queue?
I think in my experience, when I've been solo queuing, the games have been pretty fast. So I've been playing around low to mid diamond elo for a lot of my games, and I almost never see a Dragon Soul in those games. Maybe it's the solo queue mentality of people just going for kills and not focusing on objectives. But what's happened in a lot of the programs that I've observed, we're about halfway through Saturday of the first week of LCS, but I've seen the LEC games, and even we just saw Golden Guardians actually get Dragon Soul and then lose. Right? And that was something that I know in development they were trying to be explicit about this being a powerful buff, but not a guaranteed win. And they've actually kind of hit it fairly early on. So I think some games in Pro have been quite fast. But I know in week 1 of the LEC, the games actually ended up being a little bit slow. Slower than they were last year, at least. I think last year and in 2018, around Worlds time, the games, in my opinion, were kind of at an ideal length, where most games were ending around 30 minutes. Sure, you'd be able to have that 20-minute stomp, but you wouldn't get many that go upwards towards an hour. I think one of the longest games of the year at Worlds was like 50 minutes or something. So that felt like a good balance to me, and I hope that that's the type of pace that gets maintained. It's too early to tell if that's it yet.
Of course. So let's jump over to kind of one of the forgotten roles, support.
Okay.
So support now had their item changed to where it automatically upgrades.
Yeah.
Now, what is like your first initial impressions of this? Because one might think that this would give more access for supports to buy damage items or something. So just what are your thoughts on that change?
Yeah, so what that change has done is it's increased a support's power in the mid game. Because originally, if we go back to last year, the first, depending on if you're a Spell Thief support or a Relic Shield support, the first 900 to 1500 gold of your build was decided. You didn't get to build anything else. Now, not only do you get to decide what your first purchase is while you're generating gold from your support item, once it completes, you hit a 2-item power spike basically faster than ever before. Yeah. So that's where you're seeing the Stoneplate Leonas with the Relic Shield support item come in and be very powerful. But after that, since with quest completion you stop generating gold, you actually don't hit max items. So the late game, if the game gets towards 40 minutes, supports are probably weaker than they would have been last season, because at that point you would have had 2,500 gold generated from your support item. So I think it fits what a support player wants to do while not making them OP. So that's a change that I actually really like. It feels good to be able to make your own item decisions. It makes you stronger in the mid game, but it's still balanced because your quest turns off.
Yeah, I never thought of that.
Yeah, it's really cool.
That's a good idea. So let's talk about your role now, the jungle. Everyone's saying that jungle is just trash right now. It's such a bad role.
Sure.
What are your thoughts on just the impact of jungle? Do you think junglers still have high impact?
Yeah, I do. But the impact is lower than it was last year, for sure. I actually just went and looked at the top 20 solo queue accounts of EU West, Korea, and NA to see the role distribution. And I wish I had the exact numbers for you, but jungle had about as many accounts in the top 20 as mid. Last year, it was like way more. Like jungle actually used to dominate the top of the ladder, but that doesn't mean that the role doesn't feel bad because you're behind in experience or that you've had to change the way you play, because I think most roles power up throughout the game.
Yeah.
Last year, unless you did the red side, or we're familiar with the Krug, red buff, Raptor
Krugs.
Spirit hit level 3, that was like the only early game path you could do.
Yep.
Now that you can hit level 3 out of full clear blue side, full clear red side, or you can do red blue Gromp or red blue Krugs to hit, like there's a lot of different ways to hit level 3, and you can hit level 3 faster. So jungler's level 3 is more powerful than it was last year. That's pretty much the only place it's more powerful, right? So their power is up very early on and then decreased throughout the game because the experience is lower. And I believe in patch 10.3, a little bit of experience is getting put back into the jungle. So I think the design team has said, all right, we overshot a little bit on this experience nerf to the jungle, so they're trying to put something back to strike a better balance. But yeah, I think that was the goal, was to increase jungling path diversity. And they did that early game, and they didn't want them carrying every high elo solo queue game, which was kind of close to what was happening last year.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
All right, all is not lost for the jungle. Okay. So just as a last tidbit, what is your favorite change into the season?
Oh, that's interesting. I think I almost never get to see it because I mentioned that I basically never see Dragon Soul. I really like the new Elder Dragon laser. And I find it so interesting because it's like a lesson in how power is displayed. Because this Elder Dragon is really not that much stronger than the old one. And in several cases, it's actually weaker. Because the old one used to greatly amplify the elemental drakes you already had, and then give you this incredibly powerful true damage burn, which was often more than 20% of the damage you did to a target.
Yeah.
And what this one does is if you're below 20%, then it finishes you. But everyone sees that giant laser, which is like viscerally satisfying.
It looks OP,
yeah,
right?
It looks amazing. It's just like, wow, there's nothing I could do. I couldn't stay alive. That's what the old buff was doing. It just wasn't telling you, right? So I like the clarity and the power that comes from that feeling. And then beyond that, I like the support change because I like building items and being strong in the game as support.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your time. This has been Azento from Esports Heaven and Jatt from Riot. Thank
Thanks.
you.